Okay, next up, keynote. Very exciting keynote. We have Riva Melissa-Tez here with us from San Francisco today. She's managing partner at Permutation Ventures. She focuses on venture capital for early stage applied machine learning technologies. Very future. She has a degree in philosophy. She writes for numerous publications on topics such as artificial intelligence, finance, and philosophy. She was recently appointed an affiliate scholar at the Institute for Ethics and Emerging Technology. Among numerous companies Riva Melissa has started, from toy stores to tech firms, she started Berlin Singularity, an accelerator for early-stage biotech tech companies. And Riva Melissa is always learning, recently about systematic failures in the justice system through her help with San Quentin State Prison's financial literacy course. She's a singular force in technology, in investing, and in nature itself. And I'm so pleased that we were able to bring her to the summit this year. Please join me in welcoming Riva Melissa.
Hello. Let's see. How do I start this? Okay. Well, I'm always a nervous public speaker. I think it's a Brit in me. One sec. So I get invited to speak at a bunch of stuff, and normally I kind of do this presentation about why investing in AI is important. And I normally talk about things like this. So this is a slide, I think, from CB Insights about how all these big corporates are trying to acquire early-stage AI companies. And a few months ago, I was doing a keynote at a conference, and I kind of did a whole hour talk about this stuff, like AI companies, the M&A market for 2015, 33 acquisitions, average team size was 7, great investment. And I walked away from that conference feeling really icky. I was like, oh, that's not why I went into AI. I didn't go into AI to talk about M&As and acquisitions and what companies were worth. I went into AI because I care about impact. So I did another presentation the following week, and I just did this. And everyone was like, oh, God, crazy Brit. And I totally changed my presentation, and I'm doing the same kind of presentation today. This is only the second time I've done it. It's pretty personal, so forgive me if I give you too much information about my life. Here are my parents. This is when they're about my age, so I'm 27. When I first gave this presentation, it was really focused around my mother, because my mother has very bad schizophrenia and has done since she was about my age. And it caused all sorts of problems for us. I grew up in a homeless shelter for a few years of my life. And my dad is like a very typical electrical engineering professor, Asperger's, just, a guy who wasn't around when I was a kid. When I first gave this presentation, my dad was a healthy guy, and actually, after the presentation, he had a stroke during a coronary heart bypass. So he was in a coma for a month. So the first time I gave this talk, it was just about my mother, but now it's about both of them. And I'll come back to them later. Okay. So this is Silicon Valley, San Francisco. When I first moved to San Francisco from Germany, I remember just seeing this homelessness and homeless people on the street every day. And when I first moved there, I would kind of check if every single person was all right. Because I was like, why are they lying on the ground? I gotta go check if they're okay. And now, 3 years later, I kind of just walk by. It's become part of the scenery. And I sort of hate myself for it. And I wonder how many people in Silicon Valley have just done that from the beginning, kind of walk past these problems every day and not address them. And it's a weird situation to be in. We're in one of the most affluent tech hubs in the world, the acropolis of our generation. And here's all these investors and tech people just walking past homeless people every day who are suffering from drug addictions or mental health disorders, much like my mother. If my mother hadn't had the same support that the National Health Service in England and me and my sister had given her, it could be her on the streets. So this is a good fact. On any given day, there are estimated 6,686 homeless adults in San Francisco. And I think that this counts as a problem. And I wrote an article about this. Silicon Valley has a problem. It's a good, catchy title. I just spend so many times watching companies pitch us, and they're like, we're solving a problem. And I'm like, what's the problem? It's like, well, we use machine learning to help figure out what teams want for lunch before they order it. So if everyone's not in the office, we know what they want for lunch before they're even on the office. And I was like, that's not a problem, that's a perk. And that's fine. You know, there's plenty of like perk products we all use. Many of us use Uber. I mean, I use a company that like picks up my dry cleaning and drops it back. But they're not solving problems. And I think that this narrative around problem solving and impact has been like kind of like bastardized in the last few years. You have these companies pitching in Silicon Valley saying like, changing the world. Every company is changing the world. I'm like, it's okay to just be a perk product. Yeah, that's okay. But if you're taking away from the people who are really trying to solve problems by saying that every company is like a game changer in the world impact space. So yeah, this is an article I wrote. I actually got a lot of attention for it because everyone was like, oh yeah, they really annoy me too. And I was like, okay, good. And I thought a lot about kind of like, you know, as a person who didn't know anything about investment, going into investing. I have a background. I started a toy store, and then I did a children's app, and I really didn't know anything about finance. And I spent 6 months trying to learn everything I could about venture capital in a remote French village, which was the only place I could get any peace and quiet. And during that time, I read so much about ROI. I read like every investment report for the last 25 years. I tried to understand what different LPs, which people put into funds, want. And there was all this chat about like return of investment, like, you know, what is the ROI for an investment deal? And during that time, I kind of thought to myself, well, how about return of impact? If you have a return of investment, how do you measure for an impact return? And it's actually a really tough question to ask, because defining impact as a word is very tough. And defining impact as a direct impact or non-direct impact from a company or a startup or idea is a challenge in itself. So there's a lot of research being done in Stanford right now around how do you measure and define impact, which I find really compelling. My former business partner was involved in that research. And it's a question that we should all put out there, which is, you know, how do you measure and create benchmarks for generating impact? And the reason why I put this image is that, again, when I did the first presentation, I thought that, you know, when you're sick and on your deathbed or like just ill in hospital, you're probably not thinking like, oh man, I'm so glad that company gave me an 8x return 20 years ago. You're probably thinking, this hospital environment really sucks. And you know, they're still using pen and paper to do you know, lots of healthcare records. And why isn't science better that it can cure me right now? So I'm always trying to think in my mind around ROI as return of investment and a return of impact. Haven't figured it out, but still trying to work it out. And it kind of gets me into like why I love science so much. I think that the extent of human flourishing depends on the current limits of science. Like 100 years ago, people would die from consumption, and then TB, and now, you know, we have cancer, lots of people getting strokes, including my father. And the current level of science is kind of like how much you will enjoy and experience your life. Like, you know, Alzheimer's, dementia, if we knock those things out, people could be older and healthier and happier. And I think it's part of like the human nature and drive to kind of like push the limits of science to benefit for everyone. And science comes from the etymology of the word is scientia, which actually means knowledge. And I did a philosophy degree, so you know, lover of wisdom, lover of science has kind of been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. How do we acquire knowledge? Okay, now it's going to get a bit more technical. I think it's similar how like machine learning acquires knowledge and how like AI acquires knowledge and how humans do. We kind of get this kind of raw data. We kind of pass it in our minds. We get all this information. We live in a very complex world. And once we've kind of like transformed the data and we're looking at patterns, a bit like how deep learning does in AI, we kind of come out with a hypothesis. And that's true for all science. It's true for every question that you guys are asking. That's true for like every machine learning algorithm at the same time. And acquiring knowledge in healthcare is really hard. So I've kind of put a focus on this in this talk to focus around machine learning in healthcare as an impact space. But this stuff, which is how do we acquire knowledge, is really, really hard in a space like healthcare. I pressed it twice. Because you have things like legacy systems, you have so much complexity. The human body is such a complex thing. The mind, the brain, like the environment of different hospitals and how healthcare works. And you have all these issues around privacy and poor incentive structures in healthcare. So when I've been thinking about how do you acquire knowledge and push the levels of science, I've been thinking about that specifically in a healthcare kind of understanding information space. Like I mentioned, my background is in philosophy. I want to put out there that you don't have to have any traditional background in any field to become an expert in it. I got Forbes 30 under 30 for finance. Trust me, I didn't do any finance research when I was younger. And I think that the role of philosophy is also kind of to ask the big questions that things like technology can understand. So when I was doing philosophy, I kind of got bored because I was like, you're thinking about Descartes and like how to understand the mind, but you're not thinking about things like neuroscience. And technology, in my mind, is kind of pragmatic philosophy. So things like computer science, biotech, thinking about like healthy lifespans, thinking about how the mind works. It's really modern day philosophy. So anyone working in tech, I'm going to say you're a philosopher. So, we're all friends. But then thinking about technology and thinking about like how I mentioned earlier, how to push the limits of science so that people have happy, healthy, better lives, it really comes around how do you innovate innovation. So innovation, relies on like things like curing cancer or curing Alzheimer's or curing stroke relies on an innovation somewhere down the line. But how do you make it so that innovation comes faster, quicker, cheaper, better? Well, you kind of have to innovate the innovation pipeline. It's like very meta. But it takes $1 billion to bring roughly $1 billion to bring a drug to market, up to 15 years. And one of my areas of research has been how do you make that faster, quicker, so that those drugs and those discoveries can come to people who are living now. I really like this image because I think this sums up like most of tech. So you have all these great researchers, and then they're like, I think the caption for this image is code faster. I think that one of the problems that we have is kind of like an incentive issue. You're a great researcher, you're a great scientist, you're a great developer, or even you're just an entrepreneur who's wanting to get in the space. It's actually really, really hard to do things and match things like financial incentives, impact incentives, personal incentives. Like, I'm surprised that anyone gets anything done. And I'm like impressed if anyone can execute anything. So I remember being really naive a few years ago and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to change the world and do all this stuff. Now I'm like, if I can manage a team of 6 people every day, I'm like very, very happy. So I think we have this incentive problem, which is like, how do we match incentives, different people within teams, different cultures, different ideologies, political views? How do we match those incentives and create like narratives and ideologies, like the first presentation said, that moves people towards like an impact perspective? And that's a very complex web. And I actually think that AI has a role in doing that, but that's probably a different talk. Okay. Problems with startups and VC. I don't call myself an investor because I don't like most investors. And I think people who traditionally go into investment kind of like, oh, I want to work in finance and make a shit ton of money. And I'm like, I kind of like AI and science. So I'm going to go into investment to kind of impact that space. But it's not a traditional route to investment at all. And I've spent a long time trying to think about what are the problems there. And like I mentioned earlier, every company is changing the world, which is definitely a problem. Things like code are very cheap. You can put lots of programmers in a room. You can get them to pivot very easily by like changing the code base. It's not so similar when you do things like pharma or biotech. So you've got this issue around kind of like tech companies being very much software based and getting a lot of investment away from things like biotech and pharma and life sciences. Bros funding bros, I can definitely tell you that happens in Silicon Valley. Impact investment is poorly defined and incentives are really messed up. Oh, I made this. This is basically Silicon Valley to me. We're making Facebook for hamsters. Sorry, we're not investing in social networks anymore. But we use cutting-edge machine learning algorithms. Here's 10 million. There's also a problem with research in academia. I applied to do a PhD. The guy was like, don't do it. You've got a very broad knowledge of a very broad space. You don't want to join the workers' union. I'm not saying that PhDs are bad. I'm just saying that like, it's actually you become very, very deep and very, very narrow in a field. And you have those problems in academia around like reproducibility and there's no incentive for publishing negative results. These are all the things I'm talking about as like why things that we have to overcome to like extend the like flourishing of science. And again, incentives are really messed up in research and academia too. That's why AI is so cool. AI is cool because it's a tool to reduce complexity. You should apply it to any problem domain where you can collect data and you're trying to work out what's the best way to move forward within this problem domain. It can be healthcare, it can be sciences, it can be even an incentive structure problem. If you're able to collect the data, which is actually most of the work in something like machine learning, then you can try and optimize for the result that you want the most. So AI to me is an inherently philosophical tool to reduce complexity. Okay, back to impact. If you develop a cure for cancer, everyone's going to love you. Woo! But the problem is that along that route, you need people to create tools to allow that discovery to happen. And I really like this quote by Nick Bostrom, who is the guy who wrote the book Superintelligence about AI when he's at Oxford University, which is, for the advancement of human knowledge, we should focus more on an indirect contribution. A superficial contribution that facilitates work across a wide range of domains can be worth much more than a relatively profound contribution limited to one narrow field. An example of that is, if you create a technology or a tool that allow people to do better reproducibility in science, you actually make it quicker for everyone to get to those cures. And to me, those people don't get enough praise. Like the people who find the cure, find the discovery, get the praise, but the people who create the tools for those things to be like to come to fruition, to me, are like the real heroes. They're like the silent, indirect contributors investors. And my like aim in life is like fund those guys. Those people building platforms and tools that allow for impact and innovation to happen. Okay, wait. Oh, whoops, I pressed it twice. As I mentioned earlier, healthcare, very, very complex problem because our bodies are very complex systems. And if we were able to collect better data, biomarkers, genomics, et cetera, we'd be able to think about things like better interventions. And I again think that much of this is a machine learning problem, and hopefully in the next 50 years' time, we'll see a revolution in healthcare thanks to things like machine learning, deep learning, and reinforcement learning. Companies that get me out of bed in the morning. So these are companies that I like that are like using AI, machine learning, or technology to really innovate innovation. You've got this company, Atomwise, which use drug discovery, neural networks of drug discovery. So what they do is they create a model of a disease. They did it for Ebola. And they create models of already FDA-approved drugs, and they try and match them. So instead of bringing a new drug to market, using machine learning to like pass already existing drugs and match that to like new diseases coming up. To me, amazing. You bypass all the FDA stuff. You bypass the 10 years of bringing a drug to market. A really cool company. So what do? We created a venture fund. 3 of us started it at the beginning. None of us had any venture experience. We just really wanted to help science and innovate in the AI space. But it worked. And we've done 2 things. We've done one thing, which is create an investment fund to invest in these early stage companies trying to accelerate science. And the second thing we do is we created a research team to advise large corporates and companies that really need help navigating the AI ecosystem. You can be a huge company. We have like Fortune 10 companies. You don't know what the heck to do with AI. And we help you be more impactful in your space and try and create more of an impact there. So yeah, this is what we do. Okay. This is an example of like, the kind of reports we create for these like large corporations. Okay, then I'm going to talk a bit about my parents again. When my dad had his stroke, I spent like a month sitting in a hospital whilst he was in a coma. Whilst I was there, I spent a long time kind of like modeling how hospitals work. You have like an information flow between doctors. You have an information flow between like patients and families. It took me 2 weeks to work out if my dad's like thing holding up his heart was MRI compliant because I had to get his surgery notes and do all this kind of stuff. Whilst I was in the hospital, I realized that one of the biggest problems that we have as like impact entrepreneurs or impact investors is that we can understand one field but really not understand another. So I understand a lot about machine learning, and I thought I kind of understood healthcare intuitively, but being in a hospital for a month made me realize that like all my assumptions was wrong. I said, like, why are you doing everything on pen and paper? This is an example of like the kind of paper records that they had for my father. I said, why do you do everything on paper? It actually takes longer in a ER doctor's kind of world to unlock an iPad and like write it down with their fingers, or like to click buttons. So actually it's quicker to do paper and pen. Now before that, any company that comes to me saying, hey, we're going to automate hospital stuff, I'd be like, yeah, automate everything. And now kind of like understanding this other problem domain makes me realize that one of the roles that we have to make impact is kind of like understand one domain and understand another domain well enough so that we can kind of like do this cross-domain application. So understanding how hard it is to understand hospitals has made me like want to do a lot of things. Firstly, I made my dad's surgeon an advisor of our fund, which everyone thought was very weird. But then I can like run questions by him instead of Kaiser Permanente Ventures or whoever I'm supposed to talk to. So trying to understand like people on the front line who are actually meant to use your technology or use your ideas and getting in conversations with them around like what would be the most impactful thing. And a lot of the times, I think the last panel was saying this too, it's really not what you think intuitively to be the case. So I think impact is like actually quite counterintuitive a lot of the time. Going back to my dad. So when my dad was in hospital, I was like, okay, he's in a coma, not talking to me much, but I'm going to research because he's a researcher too. So I spent a lot of time researching kind of like every paper around strokes and everything I could research around like hospitals and healthcare. And the end goal was, well, how do I create impact in a space like this? And one of the things that I realized also was that it's very hard for doctors to keep up with modern day literature. So like you become a doctor, you're in a hospital, you did your PhD or your doctor's stuff, I don't even know what it is, 10 years ago, and you're not up to date with like current practices and current papers. And one of the things I learned was that there were certain drugs and certain technologies that would really help my dad when he'd had his stroke. And one of the use cases for machine learning, one of the use cases for impact, I think, is really trying to like help people get access to current knowledge. Like we all have a phone in our pockets that like allows us to access the whole of human history. But like, how do you know what is the most relevant information for the problem domain that you're in? I think is a huge impact problem for any industry, especially healthcare. So afterwards, by the way, my dad is better. He just played football with me the other day. But one of the things I've been trying to do is look at how AI can pass medical data and literature and be relevant to doctors when they're in a situation. So this is an article that we wrote for Wired around how do you create these kind of companies. And I'm not saying that we have the answer, but it's one of those things where I think that the real unique impact space comes from understanding what the problem is within the hospitals. So if anyone wants to do these kind of companies, first of all, message me, because we're like trying to incubate and start lots of companies in this space. But access to information, I think, is like the ultimate game changer in things like impact. I'm going to end on this quote. What we want to do is work towards things like cure for human diseases, immortality, the end of war. These problems are too huge for us to tackle today. The only way is to get smarter as a species through evolution or genetic engineering or through AI. Thank you.